Some secrets stay hidden in whispers for years, while others arrive suddenly, pulling you into a journey with no turning back. My story started just like that. I'm Bethany, 45 years old, and from the outside, my life seemed flawless. I was married to Andrzej, a strong, successful businessman. We had no financial struggles, lived in a spacious home, and to everyone around us, we appeared to be the perfect couple. But nobody saw the countless nights I spent alone, or the growing emptiness inside me that no one knew about. Until Frank entered the scene. Frank, Andres' father, had lost his wife years earlier and had learned to live by himself. But what set Frank apart wasn't just his solitude. Despite his age, he had an undeniable presence. Charismatic, intelligent, and effortlessly charming. He was the kind of person who could pull you into his world without you even realizing it. He had been visiting us often for years, pulling me into deep conversations that I always looked forward to. But then, things started to change. One day, Frank called Andres to tell him that he planned to move to a town nearby. He wanted a quieter life, somewhere closer to us. I already visit all the time anyway, so why not be closer, he said. But I knew the real reason. Had he sensed the same things I'd been trying to ignore for so long? I wasn't sure, not until that night. The night Andres left me alone once again. Frank arrived in the afternoon, just as Andres was still missing. Of course, he had said he was working, but by now, I knew better. A weight filled my chest, a mix of anger and disappointment. But today, something felt different. I didn't feel like calling Andres to demand answers. I didn't want to confront him because, deep down, I had already given up. Once certain doors open, they don't close again, and I was standing at that threshold. When I opened the door, Frank greeted me with his usual warm smile. He held a small bag in his hand, and as he stepped inside, his eyes lingered on me just a bit longer than usual. It was impossible not to notice, but this time I didn't feel uncomfortable. If anything, it calmed something inside me. "Bethany," he said, his voice calm as always. "It's always a pleasure to see you, but today you look different." I raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" He tilted his head slightly. "I don't know. More open, maybe?" A small flicker of something ran through me. I had always known that Frank saw things about me that Andrzej never did. Maybe until now, I had been the one pushing those moments away. But today I wasn't going to dismiss them. "Come in," I said. "I'll make us some coffee." As we walked to the kitchen, I felt his gaze on me. Frank had never been the type of man to rush into anything. He took his time, carefully choosing his words. He filled the silence without making it awkward. "I've decided to move to a small town nearby," he said after a while. I paused while placing the cups on the counter. "Really?" He nodded. "Yeah, I want a quieter life. But I also want to be close to you both. I've already looked at a few places. I'm thinking of a small house by the water, peaceful, quiet." I wasn't sure if his words were calming me or creating a new tension inside me. But before I realized it, I was getting lost in the conversation. "It would be nice having you close by," I said without thinking. Frank smiled slightly, lifting his eyes from his cup and looking directly at me. "Yeah, and when Andres is busy with work, you can always come over to clear your head. You know, living alone can be harder than people expect sometimes." There was something in his voice, something unspoken, but impossible to miss. Slowly, I lifted my head and met his gaze. For years, I had ignored something in our conversations. The way he spoke to me, the way he looked at me. But today, I wasn't ignoring it. Frank's interest in me had always been there, but today I was finally seeing it, looking at him the same way. The only question running through my mind was, after everything Andres had done to me, was I still trying to be loyal, or was it just habit at this point? Frank took another sip of his coffee, never breaking eye contact. "I mean it, Bethany. I've always enjoyed talking to you, and in this new life I'm starting, I'd really like to have you in it." His words echoed in my mind. If this were any other time, I might have laughed it off or changed the subject, but not today. Today, I was part of the game too. Before this story becomes any more intense, be sure to subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to stay updated. And if you leave a super like or a comment, I'd really appreciate it. Seeing Frank's enthusiasm about his new life surprised me, but it also intrigued me. As he talked about his plans, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. A real conversation, a real connection. "So, when are you moving?" I asked, genuinely curious. Frank smirked slightly, took another sip of his coffee, and turned to me. Actually, I've already bought the house, he said, locking eyes with me. Haven't told Andres yet. He'd probably just ask, why didn't you run it by me first? I raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. Seriously? You didn't mention it to him at all? Frank shook his head, pulling his phone out of his pocket and unlocking the screen. Nope, didn't really feel the need to. This is my decision. I just came to see the place one more time and sign the paperwork. It's only about 30 minutes from here by car. When he held the phone out toward me, I instinctively leaned in to take a look. As I scrolled through the pictures, an unexpected feeling crept into my chest. A wide porch, big windows, the kind of house where you could feel the ocean breeze from every corner. It was beautiful. This place is amazing, I murmured, staring at the screen, taking in every detail. Frank shifted closer, and our shoulders brushed. I hesitated, my fingers still on his phone, frozen in place. That small touch between us felt like it lasted forever. I'm glad you think so, he said, his voice low and steady. I lifted my head slightly and looked at him. There was a different warmth in his eyes, the kind I hadn't felt in years, like the shiver that runs through your body when a warm hand brushes against your skin. My heart pounded, but I didn't pull away. Hours passed. Conversations, laughter, shared memories. But the pull between us wasn't just about words. We both knew it. As the night stretched on, I finally retreated to my room. Andres still hadn't come home. I didn't check my phone. I didn't even want to think about where he was. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I took a deep breath. There was restlessness inside me, but at the same time, I felt strangely at ease. Just as I was about to lie down, I heard a soft knock on the door. I froze. It was late. No one should be knocking at this hour, but something inside me already knew who it was. Frank. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I stared at the door. A hesitation crept in. The thin satin nightgown I was wearing clung to every curve, barely covering anything. I always slept like this. I liked feeling comfortable, but now it felt different. Should I not open the door looking like this? It would be impossible for Frank to ignore it. But the moment I thought about Andres, about his betrayal, the anger inside me shifted my decision. He was in another woman's bed while I was supposed to be alone in mine. And Frank? He hadn't come here by accident. I had felt his interest in me for a long time, but today it was different. Because of Andres. Because of everything he had done, I wasn't going to spend another night lying awake in an empty bed. I took a deep breath, ran my fingers through my hair, adjusted the strap of my nightgown, and walked toward the door. My hand hovered over the knob for a moment. Deep down, I knew I was about to cross a line. But that was the thing. I no longer cared about lines. I opened the door. Frank's eyes locked onto me instantly. The way he looked at me sent a strange satisfaction through me. His gaze flickered from my face downward, lingering on the low-cut neckline, the curve of my waist, the way the satin barely covered my thighs. For a second, I swear he forgot to breathe. But Frank was always a man who kept himself in check. You can come in, I said, opening the door a little further. I lowered my voice more than I had anticipated. Frank hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. I shut the door behind him and moved toward the bed, lying down with ease. Then I asked the question that had been on my mind. Where's Andres? Frank blinked, caught off guard. He still isn't back? He asked, his gaze remaining on me, though it seemed like he was trying to focus on the conversation. No, I said, tilting my head slightly. I'm used to it by now. He does this all the time, leaving me alone. I met Frank's eyes, trying to hold his gaze. But tell me, Frank, I continued, giving him just enough time to feel the weight of my next question. Do you think I'm the kind of woman who should be left alone? Silence filled the room. I wanted to watch Frank's reaction. He was always calm, rational, and distant, but in that silence, I could see the storm brewing inside him. The strap of my nightgown slipped down my shoulder. I could have fixed it, acted normal, but I didn't. Instead, I casually adjusted the bedspread with one hand, shifting my legs slowly and deliberately. The movement felt natural, effortless, but it was undeniably effective. Frank swallowed hard. I could tell he didn't know what to say, but his eyes, they said everything. For a moment, he stared at me, torn between shock and something else. No, Bethany, you're beautiful. You're stunning. You know that, he said, looking away as though holding eye contact would break him. But Andres not being here, that worries me. Do you know what's going on? I locked eyes with him, my voice calm but unwavering. I wasn't holding anything back anymore. I took a deep breath and let the words spill out all at once. He's cheating on me, Frank. I've known for a long time. The words hit the air between us like an explosion. Frank just stared, his eyes widening, not even breathing for a moment. Bethany, how could he do that? He asked in a quiet voice, as if he couldn't believe it. It was the right reaction, the normal reaction, but I wasn't normal anymore. I stood up, letting the satin of my nightgown slide over my skin as I loosened the strap. I kept my gaze locked on Frank as I whispered, I don't care. His face froze, caught between shock and something else entirely. Bethany, he breathed, but his voice faltered. The composed, rational man I had always known was crumbling right before me. I took a step toward him, close enough for him to feel my breath. Isn't this what you wanted all along? I murmured, my voice barely above a whisper. Isn't this why you kept coming here so often? Isn't this why you're moving to a town so close? Frank swallowed hard. Even a man like him, so disciplined, so in control, couldn't resist any longer. He hesitated for a second, fighting something within himself, but then he closed the distance between us in an instant, pressing his lips to mine in a kiss that carried years of repressed desire. His hands gripped my waist, pulling me toward him. His touch burned against my skin, raw, desperate, and inevitable. And in that moment, I knew there was no turning back. When Frank finally pulled away, he was breathless, his eyes searching mine. They were filled with hesitation, but also with something deeper. He was trying to remind himself how far he shouldn't go, but we had already crossed that line. Bethany, he whispered, his voice hoarse. What if Andres comes home? What if he walks in right now? I met his gaze, my lips curving into a slow, knowing smile. Without a word, I walked to the bed and sank into it, my body relaxing into the soft pillows. I ran my fingers through my hair and tilted my head as I watched him. I locked the front door, I said, my voice smooth and steady. I left the key in the lock. I held his gaze, my smile deepening. He couldn't get in even if he tried. My words hung in the air, but my body, every movement, invited him closer. Frank hesitated for just a few seconds, as if fighting some last shred of resistance. But then, I saw it. The hesitation in his eyes disappeared, replaced by something more certain. Slowly, he started walking toward the bed, his gaze never leaving mine. How did you know I wanted you this much? He asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. I shifted slightly, letting my fingers graze the sheets, my body instinctively responding to his closeness. My eyes met his, silently urging him to come closer. Because I always felt it, I murmured. And so did you. Frank reached the edge of the bed, placing his hands on either side of me. He leaned in slowly. The moment I felt his breath on my skin, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. As he shed the last of his clothes, neither of us cared. When Frank moved closer, I realized just how attractive he was. His body was muscular and large, and I couldn't help but wonder how someone his age could look so young. But I could tell that Frank no longer hesitated. I thought about the betrayal I'd experienced and how close I was to Frank now. I felt a wave of excitement rush through me, and everything had shifted in an instant. At that moment, I felt something larger than I'd ever felt before. This is so beautiful, I said, reacting to the intensity. Frank, believe me, he responded. It's the same for me. You're a very beautiful woman, and I always knew Andres never deserved you. At that moment, I closed my eyes and surrendered to the moment. My hands gripped the sheets so tightly I couldn't describe it. Occasionally, my hands roamed over Frank's shoulders and back, and my nails unintentionally left marks. The sight of them only fueled my excitement. Frank was breathless, and so was I. My body trembled as I lifted my head toward the ceiling, closing my eyes. I've never been this excited before, I whispered. There's more than this, Bethany, Frank said. I immediately responded, That house, Frank? I'll come to the house you're renting very often. Frank seemed to like that, and he looked at me with admiration. I turned my head to the right and watched us through the large mirror on the wardrobe. At that moment, Frank completely let himself go. That night, Andres didn't come home again. And I was in Frank's arms, experiencing a passion I never saw coming. Somewhere deep inside, I knew I should feel guilty, but all I really felt was how real every touch had been. And the fact that I would never forget these moments. When I opened my eyes in the morning, Frank wasn't there. The silence hit me strangely, like an ache I hadn't expected. I got out of bed and walked to the kitchen where I found a piece of paper sitting on the counter. It had nothing on it except an address. Something stirred inside me. My heart started pounding and I couldn't stop it. Frank hadn't said a word, he had just left. But I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. I could feel it. By noon, Andres finally came home. He looked around, clearly indifferent, and asked, "Where's Frank?" I locked eyes with him, my voice cold and steady. "He left when you didn't show up." I stared at his blank face. He didn't care, and that hurt more than anything. A few years ago, when I first realized this, something inside me had broken. But now? Now it didn't matter at all. The first day Andres was gone again, I didn't waste any time. I grabbed the piece of paper with Frank's address, threw on the sexiest outfit I could find, and walked out the door. And let me tell you, I can't wait to share all the details about that night. About what happened with Frank in that huge glass-walled bedroom overlooking the ocean. This story isn't over, it's just beginning. Don't forget to hit that super like, subscribe to my channel, and drop a comment for more. Turning on notifications means you'll get these kinds of stories even faster. I promise.